The airport buzzed with passengers rushing to their gates, but all eyes turned to one shocking scene. A young black boy, no older than 10, sat quietly in his seat, clutching his small backpack. Then out of nowhere, a flight attendant stormed over, her face twisted with irritation. "You need to get off this plane," she snapped. Confused and embarrassed, the boy looked around, hoping someone would step in. But no one did. Moments later, he was escorted off, his eyes brimming with tears. What no one knew was that this moment would change everything. Because in just 11 minutes, a twist no one saw coming would turn the entire situation upside down. And the woman who thought she had all the power, she was about to regret everything. Stay tuned, because this story is one you won't believe. The boy stood at the gate, his small hands clenched into fists. He didn't understand why he had been forced off the plane. He had done nothing wrong. Passengers whispered as they passed by, some shaking their heads, but no one stopped to help. A few feet away, an older man watched the scene unfold. His sharp eyes took in the boy's trembling frame, the way he wiped at his face, trying to hide his tears. Something about it didn't sit right. He had seen unfairness before, but this felt personal. Meanwhile, inside the plane, the flight attendant straightened her uniform, convinced she had handled the situation. To her, it was just another routine day. She had no idea her decision would soon haunt her in ways she could never imagine. Because the boy she had just humiliated, he wasn't just anyone. And in a few moments, the world would know exactly who he was. Outside the gate, the boy wiped his tears and took a deep breath. He had been taught to stay strong, but right now, all he felt was hurt. He glanced down at the boarding pass, still clenched in his hand. This flight wasn't just a trip. It was supposed to be the start of something new. The older man, watching from a distance, finally stepped forward. "Hey, son, what happened?" His voice was kind, but the boy hesitated. Adults had already failed him today. Why would this stranger be any different? Meanwhile, inside the plane, some passengers exchanged uneasy glances. A few whispered about what they had just seen. "He was just a kid," one murmured, but no one spoke up. The flight attendant moved down the aisle, pretending nothing had happened. But just as the plane's engines rumbled to life, an unexpected call came through to the airline's headquarters, one that would shake everything. The boy hesitated, but something in the older man's eyes made him feel safe enough to speak. "She just told me to get off," he whispered. "I didn't do anything." His voice wavered, but there was a quiet strength beneath it. The man nodded, his mind already racing. He pulled out his phone, typing quickly. This wasn't over. Back on the plane, the flight attendant moved through the cabin, completely unaware that her actions had set off a chain reaction. In the front row, a businessman tapped his fingers against his armrest, deep in thought. He had seen the whole thing, and now his phone buzzed. A message popped up. "We have a problem." At the airline's headquarters, executives were already scrambling. A high-level alert had just come through. A name they all recognized was involved, and it wasn't just any passenger. The engines roared louder. But just before takeoff, something happened that no one saw coming. Just as the plane was about to taxi down the runway, a voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a slight delay. Please remain seated." Passengers exchanged confused glances. The flight attendant stiffened, glancing toward the front. This wasn't normal. Back at the gate, the older man put his phone away, his expression unreadable. He turned to the boy. "Come with me," he said calmly. The boy hesitated but followed. They walked through the terminal, passing curious onlookers, until they reached a private lounge. Inside, a group of sharply dressed executives sat in tense silence. The second they saw the boy, they stood. One of them, a woman with a concerned expression, stepped forward. "We had no idea," she said softly. The boy looked up, confused. No idea about what? Before he could ask, the doors swung open again. And when he saw who walked in, his heart nearly stopped. The room fell silent as the man who had just entered locked eyes with the boy. He was tall, powerful, and carried an air of authority. The flight attendants, the executives, everyone seemed to recognize him instantly. But the boy only saw one thing. "Grandpa," he whispered. The older man gave a small nod, his face unreadable. The executives shifted nervously. The CEO of the airline, the man who built the very company that owned this plane, was standing in front of them. And the boy, he was his grandson. The flight attendant's face went pale as realization sank in. She had just humiliated the heir to the company. The CEO turned to the executives. "This airline was built on respect. If my grandson can be treated like this, imagine how many others have." His voice was calm, but firm. "Change starts today." But then he looked at his grandson and smiled. "And it starts with you." The boy's eyes widened as his grandfather placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "You're stronger than you know," he said. The flight attendant swallowed hard, her confidence completely shattered. She opened her mouth to speak, but the CEO simply looked at her and said, "Actions have consequences." Within hours, the airline announced new policies ensuring fairness for every passenger. Employees were retrained, and stories like the boys would never be ignored again. But the biggest change? The CEO made a bold decision, one that no one saw coming. He transferred ownership shares to his grandson, securing his future in the company. "One day, this will be yours," he told him. "Lead with kindness." As they walked out of the lounge, the boy no longer felt small. He had learned that sometimes the most painful moments shape the strongest leaders, and this was only the beginning of his journey.